Audit Committee meeting. If everyone would please stand and rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you everyone for coming. I hope, I know it's been, with school back, traffic has been interesting out there, so I hope everyone stayed safe and everyone's gotten a good week back, kind of a good start. I believe we are waiting for one other committee member so that we have quorum. So let's see, and we do have one speaker signed up for public comment, Mr. Edwin Olsen. Mr. Edwin Olsen. Would you like to come to the podium? Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. So I'm Edwin Olsen. I'm the CEO of May Mobility. I wanted to address today the item 2A on the agenda, which is the Autonomous Mobility Services Project. May Mobility was a bidder on that project, and we ended up second in the scoring. I just wanted to provide a little additional information today. So we think May Mobility would be a great partner for HART on this project. As you may recall, we were down here in the spring, and we provided a demonstration, and many of you got a ride in the vehicle. One of the things that we thought was really great about that demonstration was that we got to work with HART a little bit, and we know that HART can be not just a customer for us, but a real partner in understanding transportation problems and working to find solutions here in Tampa. Today, May Mobility runs the world's only regular commercial service of autonomous vehicles on public roads. So we are running from 5 a.m. to midnight, 5 days a week, year-round in downtown Detroit. So that's a really unique capability that we're excited about. Beyond that, the service has been a huge success. Our riders really love the service. They're smaller vehicles, they run much more frequently. And what we're finding is that the smaller vehicles that we offer drive increased ridership over time. So wait times are way down, rider satisfaction is way up, and people are voting with their feet. My main goal today is to answer some questions and be a resource as you guys discuss. But I'd like to first tackle 3 quick items that we think might have been issues for you. The first is on wheelchair accessibility. So wheelchair accessibility is hugely important to us. It's something we've been working on for several months now, and we have a 3-stage engineering program to tackle it, which involves adjusting the door, entrance, egress door size, ramps, and securement. So this engineering process is well along the way. We're already manufacturing vehicles with the results of the first phase. So all of our vehicles have doors now wide enough to accommodate a wheelchair. Our engineering timeline puts the end of this project in June, no later than June of 2019. And actually we're ahead of schedule a little bit. So we're actually hoping that we'll have that capability in about March of 2019. Second, there was a question about the capacity of the vehicle. Now, I think it's really obvious that we want to make sure whenever we provide a transportation service that we're providing enough of it with a high enough level of quality to change people's behaviors. So we offered between 3 and 5 vehicles on the route. We think that's really important because with more vehicles, we can still provide the same throughput of people as you could with a larger vehicle, but we can radically reduce the average wait time. And that, again, is the key to driving ridership and adoption of the service. And that's what makes riders happy. The third thing I wanted to address was the pricing on our proposal. It wasn't a typo. So our bid was $675,000 less than the first selected first transit offering. That is not a loss leader for us. So we're not undercutting our own prices and operating and hemorrhaging cash to provide you that service. It's important for us that we build a relationship that can scale and grow as HART expands their transportation offerings. So even at that low price, that makes economic sense to us, and we're able to expand on that same framework. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions. We would love to work on this project with HART. We think our team represents an outstanding value, excellent long-term partner, and we'd love to work with you. At the same time, we respect the process that you guys have laid out, and if this project doesn't work out for us, we'll look forward to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olsen. Okay. Is there anyone else from the public who would like to speak? Anyone? Okay. All right. With that, we'll move on to, and again, just a reminder that we don't have quorum just yet, and hopefully we will by the time we get to agenda item 2A, and definitely want to acknowledge Mr. Olsen's willingness to answer questions during that time. So, all right, thank you. With that, we'll have the budget presentation.
Good morning. Jeff Seward, Interim Chief Executive Officer. This morning, we are going to discuss our tentative FY 2019 operating and capital budgets. This is in preparation to move forward with our 2 public hearings that we have in September that are required by Florida statute. So thus far in the discussions that we've had of the budget, they've been pretty high level. And they've changed the numbers, and this is something we go through every year. When we start talking about the budget in May, we typically start with somewhat of a substantial deficit. Expectations of the organization and the community typically exceed the revenues that we anticipate receiving in the coming year. But over that time period from May until now, we work very diligently to ensure that the expectations of the organization, the community, meet the revenues that we are anticipating coming in. So we whittle away at that deficit, and as you know, state law requires that independent special districts in the state of Florida, along with all other governmental entities within the state of Florida, must provide a balanced budget. We are not allowed to budget into a deficit. Unlike our friends at the federal government, we have to actually balance. So I am happy to report the budget I'm going to present to you today. It does balance, and for the first time in many, many years, we are able to report that we are looking at putting some money away in reserves for contingency while adding new service. And I'm also going to highlight the amount of grant revenue that this organization is utilizing next year and plans on utilizing. And that isn't out of the norm. It is money that, a funding opportunity that we have used over the last few years. And although we discuss it quite frequently at our board meetings on HART's inability or unable to access those funds, I'm going to show you today exactly what we have been accessing and what we will be utilizing next year to support our activities. So first and foremost, this is a slide which I've shown you before, and I will continue to show it. And this isn't to be taken as a negative. All public budgets have challenges. They have the demand from the communities in which they serve, the demands of the revenues or the lack of revenue growth that some agencies see, and an overall growth in expectation of service delivery, as well as the cost of delivering that service. We are not unlike any other entity, public or private, that are seeing increases in our expenditures, in just paying our employees, in fueling our vehicles and maintaining those assets. We see that those costs are rising just as the demand is rising. So again, these aren't negatives that I'm going to discuss, but just actions and activities that we have to face and pressures as we move into next year. So first and foremost, cash flow and fund balance. Again, fund balance is our piggy bank or our reserve. We are, and as you will see when we talk about the amount of federal funds that we utilize in this organization, very few of those funds don't require some type of outlay before we get reimbursed for those. So when we're looking at half of our operating budget, or actually half of our total operating and capital budget being federal grants that require $1 spent before you get $1 back from the feds, cash flow is of utmost importance in this organization. So we always keep one eye on the cash flow and our fund balance as we prepare for next year's budget. Our bargaining agreements. We have 2 bargaining units. We are formally involved in negotiations with one of the units now and anticipate formal negotiations with our other unit by the end of the fiscal year. Again, there are pressures and challenges, but we know that they occur, and we have to plan for those. Decrease in ridership. We are still seeing a decrease in ridership, but we are going to show you the ridership expectation for FY19 is flat and plateaued over where we expect to end on fiscal year 18's ridership. We have not been able to say that in a number of years. So we are looking at finally plateauing our ridership. Increase in the cost of doing business. I alluded to that a little more. If you filled up your gas tank lately, it is more than what it cost to fill up your tank a year ago. It is no different for us. And obviously, based on what we do day to day, we very much are worried about fueling vehicles. Even though we have a very, very strong consortium fuels futures contract, we still are at the mercy of fluctuations in the market. I'm going to skip the nice little orange dot, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And a pressure. It isn't a pressure, it's our obligation to add service, or at least look at tweaking service for our community. We are adding $4.9 million of additional service in the FY19 budget. A lot of that service already started this year with the 275 LX and the 48 through Temple Terrace. However, any increase in expenditure obviously increases the weight of the budget, and it is a pressure when you take all of these into case together. So let me bump back. This is the first year, and maybe the last year, that you see this actual pressure in this slide. And we added possible transit referendum. This slide wasn't updated before it actually got enough signatures to get on the referendum. So it isn't possible anymore. It is. It will be on the ballot. So why is this a pressure? One thing that we have to keep, and I want you to be very aware of, is the budget that you're going to see today does not take into consideration any potential additional sales tax revenues that would be subsequent to a yes vote on the transit referendum. Nor does the capital program take into account any additional expansion or growth based on the potential referendum. I wanted to make it very clear that this budget does not reflect any impact from the referendum. However, if it does pass, and in my CEO update to you today, I'm going to talk a little bit about planning for that. If it does pass, we will be, as an organization, coming back to you in the spring of 2019 with the budget amendment. Obviously, we're looking at a budget that is 3 times greater than what we have right now and what is being presented today, at least on the operating side. So we would come back and we would amend that budget accordingly. So, based on all the pressures and all of those components that we looked at moving into the next fiscal year, I wanted to go through the high-level numbers with you. Our tentative operating budget is $78,927,742. That's an $8.3 million increase over FY18's budget, or 12%. Now, as we start to move through this, I've become aware that in some discussions that we've had with the board in its entirety, that an overall growth of 12% in the budget makes it look like the budget, we are spending 12% more. That's not the case. In governmental accounting, particularly in the state of Florida, your expenditures must meet revenues. So if we, out of the blue, get a $10 million grant from the federal government, that is considered a new revenue source and has to equate to a $10 million expense. So your budget grew $10 million automatically, even if you don't anticipate spending that entire amount in that given year. So it isn't that we're essentially spending 12% more. The budget has grown in expenditures and revenues, or possibly just revenues, for the past, or for the next fiscal year. So I'll get into a little more of that detail in the next slide. Our tentative capital budget is $32.6 million. That's $3 million, or 11% more than last year, or our current fiscal year. Our tentative operating and capital budget is $111 million. That's $11 million, or 12% greater than our current fiscal year. And unlike prior discussions with you and the board on our budget, I will be going over our capital budget with you this morning. FY19 proposed ridership is flat to our 18 projected. I mentioned that a few minutes ago. We have seen a decrease of overall 1 million trips since FY17, but the way that we're calculating and the way that we're budgeting, we're flat over what we think we will end up this year. But the reality is we have lost $4 million in revenue since 2015 in fares, and that is due to ridership declines.
Jeff, quick question. Because, and this is kind of from a perspective standpoint for the viewing public and for everyone here, the fact that we plateaued is, how does that compare relative to the nationwide trends?
Yep.
We
don't see plateauing anywhere else.
Okay. So we're, if anything, even though ridership isn't increasing, it's at least not falling anymore.
Correct.
Is that, okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
So I want to talk a little bit about that $8.3 million increase, or 12% over the current fiscal year. Again, revenues must balance to expenses, period, and vice versa. You can't spend without the revenues coming in. We are receiving a lot of additional revenue next year from local, state, and federal sources. So that grows our budget automatically. But I want to walk through exactly what that means. So in revenues, we're looking at a $4.8 million increase from state and local funding, and that does include the local county funding as well. Our property valuations grew by 10% in Hillsborough County. That's an increase of $4 million in ad valorem. Our federal funding grew by $1 million, and we decreased budgeted fares by $1.5 million. And although that runs counter to what I just said about ridership, we not necessarily mis-budgeted ridership and fare revenue the last 2 years, but it wasn't realistic, and we're truing that up now. Expenses, new service, $4 million in personnel costs, including the true-up from FY18. And I'm going to jump to that right now. I'll come back to these slides, but I wanted to show you the FTE. At the last board meeting, I mentioned a true-up that's required, and that is part of that $4 million increase in personnel costs. Last year, prior to Mission Max, in part of the $6.6 million of savings that was reported that we had anticipated recouping, part of that was the elimination of positions, not positions with necessarily people in them, but the elimination of budgeted positions going into fiscal year 18. However, there was a decision made as we moved into the fiscal year last year not to eliminate those positions and still run the service that we had anticipated cutting. Based on that, the FY18 budget has had 36 full-time budgeted, or 36 full-time positions that we have had to pay that have not been budgeted. They were not included in the FY18 budget. And the reasons for that, again, were plans for Mission Max, elimination of those 36, and not bringing them back. So again, the decision was made to keep them. They have been on our payroll for this year and are required to be on the payroll for next year as well. So what we're doing is truing up the budget and allocating the funding that's necessary for these 36 positions that wasn't included in the 18. So I've tried different ways of explaining that, and I'm hoping that this way comes through well. It's essentially, we have 36 people in 18 that we didn't plan for. We paid them this year, and we need them next year, so we need to account for them.
If I may, I think it might be prudent just to stop here and make sure, it's, because of the discussions at the last board meeting, and see if anybody has any questions on that point. I know that, and because there's the potential for that to happen again with, you're using the word truing up. And to me, what that means is you and staff are doing your best to account for possibilities and unknowns and possible directions. And when we were doing Mission Max, you accounted for one thing, but then it changed. So does anyone have any questions on that? I just want to make sure we're all clear that this wasn't an oversight. It wasn't bad planning. It's basically, you're acting on the best information at the moment, and then once that information is clarified later and you have certainty, then you do the true up. Is that a fair characterization, Jeff?
Yes, sir.
Okay, does anyone,
No.
any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for asking.
So the only new positions for FY19 are for our paratransit service. We have a bilingual paratransit travel trainer. We have 2 fixed route supervisors, which are for the streetcar, 1 for the streetcar, 6 operators for the streetcar, a supervisor for the streetcar, and a streetcar mechanic. And those are all funded through our, which is the revenue I'll talk about here in a few minutes, from the state funding for the streetcar service expansion. So I'll go back to the prior slide. So again, $4 million in personnel costs, which does include that true up, along with those new positions that you just saw. $2 million in parts and fuel is an increase over 18. $1 million contingency, I'll come back to that. And $1.3 million for other operational and administrative improvements over 18. And we continue to set aside $3 million in the year-end fund balance is what we're projecting for next year. So you take the $8.3 million increase, we're putting $3 million into fund balance, which we won't get into the governmental accounting of how that shows up on the books as revenue, but it's $3 million going into fund balance. We also have a $1 million budgeted contingency, and that's exactly what it means, a contingency for what ifs budgeted as well. So that's $4 million that we're setting aside next year for reserves, for contingency, and that equates to the increase in our ad valorem. So one could argue that the increase in ad valorem is not being expended, it's being saved and banked. And as you may recall, next year, or actually this November, not only do we have the transit referendum, we also have the homestead exemption vote. And we're looking at an impact if that passes this year, next fiscal year, the same time next year that I'll be standing before you, if it passes, we'll be looking at a $2 million hit to ad valorem. So irrespective of how much property values go up next year, we are looking at a hit and may end up eroding whatever substantial gain we get from that increase. So we have to plan for the future, period. Irrespective of the transit referendum, we need that money in the bank to fulfill our reserve requirements and to prepare for any contingencies that may arise next year. So although the overall budget increased 12% by $8 million, $4 million is being set aside, not being expended. And I think that that's a huge, huge testament to the hard work that the organization has put into not only refining the expenses that we incur every year, but providing efficient, productive service on the street within the confines of the revenues that we receive. So this is a combined capital and operating chart, and I really wanted to emphasize a couple of key takeaways from this slide. Out of $111 million combined capital and operating budget, 50% of that budget comes from federal or state or local grants. That's $55 million of our budget come from federal or state or local grants. And I don't want to sound like a broken record, but there's always a claim that we don't go after federal dollars, and that is not an accurate statement. $55 million of our budget is coming from outside external federal and state sources. That is a lot of funding that if it wasn't accessible and we didn't go after it, you're looking at the elimination of almost 3/4 of our operating budget and all of our capital budget. So it's huge, and I want to emphasize that fact as we continue the discussion, that we very much go after federal dollars. We go after state dollars, and we've formed such a good relationship with FDOT that sometimes those dollars come to us without us going after them, which is testament to the hard work that the staff does for FDOT and the citizens of Hillsborough County. So again, ad valorem, $42 million at our fares. So we're split right down the middle, essentially, with our ad valorem, our property tax base, as well as our fares and our grants. So So again, this also goes back to the point I made about cash flow being very important. We have $55 million of funds where 90% of them all require a dollar spend before we get a dollar back. So we have to manage that cash flow very, very carefully. So back to our operating budget. Our operating revenues. Ad valorem make up the majority of that at 52%. That's a $4 million increase over the prior year. The state law requires that we budget ad valorem at 95%, so you won't see our entire ad valorem increase in there. So take that in consideration as well. Passenger fares, our FTA formula grant, which typically agencies across the country use that FTA formula grant for capital. A decision was made a decade ago during the downturn in the economy and the recession to switch a lot of that formula funding over to operating to make up the difference in the fall in property tax. We have had a plan over the last few years to try to swing that, to try to bring it back where we're only using capital formula dollars versus operating. We have not got to the point where we can do that yet. State and local grants and then other revenues. So the division of our operating, we still have federal grants and we still have local grants. Also the $2.3 million that the state or the Hillsborough County is providing us from the Board of County Commissioners is also included in that operating side of the house. So revenues are pretty straightforward. I want to talk about our expenses. We have $78.9 million of expenses. Salaries and wages, again, make up the majority of that at 48%, along with our fringes. So our employee base alone is well over 51%. Key takeaways from our expense column this year: increased service, mission max, add back that we weren't budgeted. Again, we talked about that. It's primarily those 36 FTEs. We had discussed taking it out. We didn't. We have to, and it's been successful. It is a service that we wish that we would eradicate right now or eliminate at all. But it does have to be taken into account and budgeted in fiscal year 19. Increase in diesel gallons and price per gallon. I know that there are times when I am a little over zealous or confident in what I think we will get at our price per gallon going into the next year. I have been steered in a different direction this year and will be much more reality-based. So we are going to actually budget what we think we are going to get next year in our price per gallon. And then an increase in diesel gallons as well, as we have more service on the street. Increase in bus parts for added service. As you know, I announced at the last board meeting, we have a new maintenance director. We're working very closely with him to ensure that we have the parts necessary to keep our fleet maintained. As you may recall, also at the last board meeting, we had a very robust discussion on our current state of good repair with our assets. We need to invest in parts and maintenance to keep our fleet running in lieu of receiving additional funding for bus replacements in the future. Flamingo implementation. These aren't not an unanticipated cost. We knew when we started Flamingo 2 years ago that this was going to be a requirement as we're splitting the cost between PSTA and HART to implement this regional fare collection. ADP, we came to you last year talking about the movement to automated data processing for our payroll and for many of our human resource functions. We're moving forward with that as well. General liability claims increase of $300K. That's really truing up what we should have been budgeting. We are much better, much better under Ms. Lee's leadership in that area than we have been in prior years. So this is a true up of what we anticipate is more realistic moving into next year. Marketing for streetcar and increased fixed route service. Again, we have our 275LX, we have our 48, and we have our streetcar expanded service for next year, starting on October the 7th. The only way we're going to make sure that not only our new service is utilized is having people know about it. We have found out through our surveys, the discussions with the community, that there are some cases where there's just a lack of knowledge of where we provide service and what we provide. We're going to fix that. As you may recall, a year ago, we tried morning service on the streetcar, and it wasn't very successful. And one key catalyst for the lack of success for that was we just didn't let people know about it. And all due credit to the fact that we weren't given a marketing budget, we weren't given the resources to be able to do that. Well, we are going to do it this time. We are going to let people know that they can use the streetcar as a true commuter choice in the downtown urban corridor. And then budget for contingency is an expense, but it's an expense that is an expense, if that makes sense at all. Again, that's setting $1 million aside for just in case. So we also were asked to look at our operating budget by mode. So our modes, streetcar, para, and bus. So we broke out the budget by our modes. The takeaway from, the primary takeaway from here, we have para, the demand for para continues to grow. And this is the highest streetcar budget I think that we have had in ever. We've never had a streetcar budget at this amount or the service levels in this amount in the history of the new service of the streetcar. So we're very excited about that. The new service that we're adding on bus. We have we just kicked off, the last 2 months, the new United for Yellow Cab for a taxi voucher. So we feel very good about the service that we're proposing for next year. We're continuing out of 18 into 19, as well as the streetcar. Our FTE count, our full-time equivalents, our personnel, I touched on this a little before. We're looking at adding 55 into the FY19 budget, but again, 36 of those are prior year that weren't budgeted in 18. Again, our FTEs, the real new FTEs are those 19, and they are primarily paid for out of the streetcar ones are paid out of the $2.7 million that we're receiving from the state of Florida for added service. So our capital budget, and this is the first time that we've actually shown or discussed the capital budget, and there are a couple of reasons for that. The capital budget usually lags in its preparation and presentation to the board because we have to prioritize exactly where we want these dollars to be spent. Now again, although I did comment on the fact that $55 million of our overall combined budget is from federal grants, a lot of it is used in capital. You'll see $32 million of these capital projects are coming from some type of federal or local or state grant. So we know that although we receive a lot of those funds, we have to spend them very, very wisely and strategically to ensure that we maximize the most long-term asset return on those dollars. So, and they're not listed in priority of organizational need. They're listed numerically and sequentially based on the total amount. What we will have, and as we prepare for the hearings for next month, we will have details behind each of these, exactly what they are. Typically, we provide a five-year CIP. Last year in 18, we did not, and as you may recall, we were in the process of doing a full TDP update as well as a COA. So we delayed putting together a 5-year plan until FY19, as we knew the mission max, the TDP, and the COA were going to change what our outlook was over the next 5 years. So you'll be seeing a 5-year CIP coming out of the FY19 preparation here next month for the final public hearing. So a couple of key highlights I wanted to discuss from this. I won't go down the entire list. First and foremost, we have CAD AVL, our ITS system. That is the brains of our ability to communicate with our fleet. and our operators. It is imperative that where's Shannon? How old is our system?
11 years old. Over a decade.
End of life is when?
End of life.
Yes, end of life. We are past end of life for the CAT AVL. And it puts our system at risk, it puts our operators and passengers at risk if we don't move forward with getting this upgraded and replaced in the next fiscal year. So as a matter of fact, as one of your action items today, is bringing a consultant on board to help us write those requirements, help act over the next 2 to 3 years as a project lead for the project and move this project forward. So it's imperative that we move forward with the technology that is now very much outdated. And it also limits our ability to add on new technology. We found this as the case as we started to implement Flamingo. If we had a new CAT AVL system on board, it would have been a lot easier implementation than we're experiencing right now. Our HM building renovation, right now those are federal dollars of $5 million from the feds. This is something that we've talked to you about. We're in the process of designing right now. I anticipate being able to announce additional funding for that, hopefully by the public hearings. I cannot announce it right now, but I am anticipating some additional funding being provided for that building. This is one of the key, if I were to pick one of the CIP projects on this list that would most likely be immediately affected by a positive vote on the referendum, it would be this one. So right now we're in the design phase. We're going to, right now, if nothing changes, we're going to look at our 21st Avenue site property to build a new building. However, if we found that the referendum did pass, we would slow this down because there's a good chance in the next 5 years what we're designing would be obsolete already. So we would have to take a step back and re-examine exactly what our needs are, and we would be doing that process over the entire next year of 19 anyway. However, we're moving forward right now as if that doesn't even exist and moving forward with the design phase. CNG bus replacements, this is on the capital list every year and will continue to be as long as we receive funding for our buses. This is replacement of our aging fleet. Again, as you recall, our state of good repair discussion, we have a fleet that has at end of its useful life and many components of it, and we need to replace our buses as quickly as possible. I won't move through the rest of these. I know that we're sensitive on time this morning, but if there's any specific project that you have a question on, I can have a staff member talk with you after or follow up with you later in the meeting.
Thank you.
So our next steps, we have a September 10th public hearing. That's the actual millage rate and annual budget that the board has to certify and approve. And then our September 24th final public hearing that we will have the board adopt the FY19 capital and operating budget. And then just a few days later, we start October 1st and start the next fiscal year and start planning. Well, we might slow the planning this year on the FY20 budget. That concludes my presentation.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Great job. Are there any questions on the presentation?
I do.
Yeah, Ms. Williams.
Good morning. Again, great presentation. I just had a question about the 8 buses we talked about from another area that we were going to purchase. Is that the timing of that? Is that this year, or is that incorporated in the budget for next year?
It's an action item, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Very good. Thank you. And one other question: the timing of the additional. If we make changes in the routes or updates and we need to add additional headcount, is that accounted for as well as the awareness campaign? Are all of those things collectively pulled together in the budget? When one happens, then automatically you'll have an awareness campaign and you will also ensure that we've accounted for the headcount?
Yes.
Okay.
And however, if there is something unexpected, we get halfway through the year next year and find that, only as an example, our new route through Temple Terrace isn't performing what we thought it would be. That's a bad example because it's actually performing very well.
Right.
Route XYZ isn't performing to what we thought it would be, and staff is making a recommendation to change that. We would find the resources to do that, but we don't plan for any unexpected changes. But as far as our markups that we do through the year, they're all budgeted. Our route books that get updated are all budgeted. So we do plan, and that is incorporated, and it is a domino effect. Once we do one, it may move into other departments, but each of those departments is adequately funded to support that one initiative.
Okay, thank you very much.
Are there any other questions? Jeff, I just have a couple. Since the paratransit is, well, I had a question about just an update on the paratransit evaluation, just a quick status update. Where do we stand in that?
It's proceeding.
Proceeding, okay.
Yes.
Is it worth mentioning how that relates to the budget process, or as far as results, or can you give us just an overview how substantive it might be relative to this budget consideration?
So that's one reason why we have $1 million contingency. I really am not. I'm not cognizant of anything that will come out of that, positive or negative yet. If there are recommendations, to change anything that we don't normally have built within the budget, such as additional driver training or additional equipment, we would come back to the board for consideration of amending the budget to first and foremost, that isn't the first reaction that I have, is amending the budget. We try to look internally to find those resources that are already budgeted. But if there was something that came out of that report that required additional spending on top of what I'm proposing today, we would come back and we would amend the budget and most likely take it out of fund balance or look for a grant source for that funding.
And what is the timing on kind of a conclusive, roughly?
30 to 60 more days.
Okay, thank you.
So the budget will be adopted.
Okay. One other question as well, and I know we talked about this in our debrief, and you had whatever that geographic shape was with the now not possible, but the actual tax referendum. Just a question about that. So this is the first time we've sat down as a partial board, at least, since we were notified that we had to do this performance audit. And I guess my question is, and we can talk about this at the board, but I just wanted to acknowledge it because it is an audit that's currently being performed internally. Am I right, Jeff?
It's concluded.
What's that?
Yeah, the performance audit by OPAGA, which is the legislative committee that is responsible for auditing any entity that is planning on putting a sales tax initiative on a future referendum, has to go through an audit. We are the first organization, along with the county, to have an audit performed under that new legislative guidance this year. It concluded. We had executives had our outbrief Friday right about 12 o'clock. The draft report is due back to OPAGA on the 22nd of September. And by the 26th of September, they have to have the formal, by 22nd of August, the draft report has to be to OPAGA. September the 1st, the final report has to be to OPAGA from the auditors. They have 60 days from the election to have the audit completed. And we spent over 80 hours of staff time utilized during the last week in preparation for the audit. We feel very confident with our outbrief and the results of that audit. That's where we stand.
Okay, and thank you, Jeff. And I just wanted to kind of comment on that because this is the first time we've gotten together in the sunshine on that. Well, first of all, kudos so we've basically completed what we needed to do, what was imposed on us by this petition and the legislative requirement.
Yes.
We're done? Okay. I'll hold further comment, but I definitely would like to talk about this further at the board, and just wanted to see if there are any concerns or questions at this time. And if not, we'll just talk again at the next board meeting. Okay, thank you. All right, that was all I had. Thank you, Jeff. All right, appreciate it. Any other questions? No?
I'm next.
Oh, you're next. Okay. On to committee action items.
I'm gonna stand up here.
All right. Item 2A.
Actually, this is not me, but I will brief it anyway, real quick. So, as you may recall, we went through a formal solicitation process over a year ago for autonomous vehicle project in the downtown urban core along the Marion Transitway. And that contract was awarded. We moved forward with the project. And in January, I canceled that contract for performance issues pertaining to that contract. However, we learned some lessons through that process, not necessarily from the contractual side, but from the technology side. Our partners with FDOT work with us. We put it back out on the street. And this morning, staff will present to you our recommendations of moving forward with a new award and getting this project moving forward. So with that, turn it over to procurement.
Good morning, Cindy Zambella, Interim Director of Procurement.
Good morning. So
again, before you today are the considerations to award a contract to First Transit for the autonomous mobility services in the amount not to exceed $1,859,684. As Jeff said, we put the solicitation back on the street on May 4th. We posted that on our HART website, on DemandStar, and we sent that to all the firms that expressed interest during the RFI process. 22 firms downloaded that solicitation. On June 5th, 3 proposals were received, and all 3 were deemed responsive. On June 21st, the evaluation committee met to review and discuss their findings. Besides our internal HART staff, we were honored to have Ms. Katina Cavacles from FDOT District 7 and Mr. Vic Bide, who is the Chief Engineer for the City of Tampa, Transportation and Stormwater Services. The proposals were evaluated on technical merit for 900 points and price for 100 points. During the evaluation meeting, there were some areas of clarification that the committee felt necessary to go back out to all 3 offers and ask them to respond to those questions in writing. They then reconvened on the 16th of July to discuss those clarifications and then determine the final scores and rankings. They ranked as follows. First Transit ranked number 1 with a total score of 843.70 points. May Mobility ranked number 2 with a total score of 787.40 points. And TransDev ranked number 3 with a total score of 787.31 points. With that, First Transit was issued a notice of intent to award, and we negotiated a best and final offer, or a fair and reasonable offer, and that was in line with the independent cost estimate. We then received a best and final offer from First Transit on July 27th. The contract will be a 1-year base with 2 one-year options. And at this time, I'll have Dan Rodriguez come up and talk to you more about the project.
Thank you, Cindy. Good morning, Dan Rodriguez, HART Project Manager. On February 27, 2008, HART, with the help of City of Tampa, hosted a demonstration of the autonomous vehicle technology on Marion Street Transitway. This created a level of excitement in Tampa that not only added to the growing momentum happening us all around in Tampa Bay. HART created a pilot program to provide a self-driving, autonomous, shared ride shuttle service in downtown along the Transitway. The Florida Department of Transportation makes this pilot possible through a grant to HART for this purpose on this corridor. The Autonomous Mobility Service pilot will serve as a demonstration of not only moving people using state-of-the-art technology, but also to learn about public attitudes towards automation in transportation, along with documenting the safety habits of such a service. All while bringing highly automated vehicles within a connected vehicle environment. A special thanks to one of our partners, THEA, with their own connected vehicle pilot already installed infrastructure on the Transitway. Only through these great partnerships are we able to bring something of this magnitude together. 2 of our partners are here with us today. I wish to take a moment to acknowledge them. Ms. Katina Cavacles from DOT and Mr. Vic Beatty from the City of Tampa. Thank you very much. They were also involved in the selection process, so we did use multiple groups to do the selection process. I want to thank them for their time and their busy schedules to help us out with that effort. In an effort to ensure that the solicitation had required technical specifications, as well as meet all the requirements of our transit riders, HART sought the assistance of a consultant with expertise in AV technology. That firm was HNTB. Here today is the project manager, Ben Walker, who will give a brief presentation on the project. Thank you.
Good morning, members.
Good morning.
Morning.
Let me find the presentation real quick here. There's, I have a presentation now.
I don't think so.
Sorry about that delay. Good morning.
Good morning.
As stated, my name is Ben Walker, the project manager with HNTB, assisting HART with this project. What I wanted to do was briefly go over the project overview, go over a little bit of the industry best practices that were applied for this solicitation, go over the project purpose, and start to define some of the performance measures and measurables that will be applied to the winning bidder, and then our overall approach on what made this project different. So as Dan mentioned, this project looks to connect the Marion Transit Center to downtown utilizing Marion Street, approximately 0.6 of a mile long, with the loop around Marion Transit Center if needed, utilizing the 8 signalized intersections along Marion Street, as well as the unsignalized crossings, and of course the railroad as well. In terms of the vehicle requirements that were a part of the request for proposals, we requested that all vehicles have the ability to travel up to or around 15 miles an hour, provide 10-minute headways throughout the service time of 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday. And then again, as mentioned, start with a 1-year pilot with 24 monthly extensions for up to a 3-year pilot if desired. The differences in this solicitation is that a part of the request for proposals, a concept of operations was provided so that all proposers had a clear understanding of what would be required in different operating scenarios with which the vehicle and the operating system needs to comply with. Also the shuttle requirements, both in terms of capabilities now and in the future in terms of passenger loading, being ADA accessible in terms of audio announcements as well. We also wanted to make sure that the vehicle or any vehicle being proposed was ready. So the National Highway Transportation Safety Association, or NHTSA, has a 15-step requirement, which we required all proposals to address how they meet those 15 points. And we also clearly defined success measures so that HART had a very clear, defined role and a way when they go through the procurement process of when the shuttle operator would meet those measures of success. We also provided a clear scope of work so that the proposal could have a clear work plan with which we could grade upon. And then, of course, a payment schedule that met those deliverables and success measures. For example, one of the purposes of the pilot was to move people safely, efficiently, and sustainably along Marion Street. So therefore, as a pilot proceeds, we want to make sure that we document any number of incidents, the ridership that was used on it, emissions, as these vehicles will all be electric as well, and then the carbon intensity. And then as we go through increasing, as a part of HART's purpose, increasing multimodal options, we wanted to demonstrate the operational hours, how long those vehicles will be in service, so how long they might need to be maintained or taken out of service for any maintenance. The quality of service, again, that downtime that may be a part, and the number of concierge engagements. And that specifically is how often a concierge that would be on the vehicle would need to engage the vehicle to drive as opposed to going autonomously. And those unforeseen instances where a concierge might need to take over driving control of the vehicle. We also wanted to make sure that this vehicle was a showcase to the city and highlighted the city and opportunities for innovation and technology. And finally, attract private industry, not just from a vehicle operating standpoint, but also opportunities for additional revenue, whether through advertisements or partnerships as a part of the procurement. So our project approach divided this into 5 different phases. So upon award then, the selected contractor or vendor would prepare for the pilot and getting the vehicle ready for specifications and make it very unique to HART and the city of Tampa. Before riders will be allowed on the system, there'll be testing as a part of Marion Street to make sure that the system is functioning properly and coordinating with the DSRC units appropriate along the intersections there. And then conducting the pilot, and that's where the pilot would begin ridership operations for up to a year. Then upon the conclusion of that 1 year, have different opportunities to continue the pilot for up to 2 years and potentially expand the pilot off of Marion Street or further down Marion Street as well. With that, I'll be able to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. Are there any questions?
I have a question, Chair.
Ms. Williams.
Thank you for the presentation. In regards to the criteria utilized to evaluate after 1 year and then potentially impose the additional 2 years, will we receive an update at the end of the year in order to know, just give us an update on where we are and how the progress is being made, or is that a quarterly? How often will we receive that information in light of the fact that it's a 1 year pilot?
Sure, we'll actually be getting from a monthly download. The vehicle itself will be downloading daily the information electronically, but monthly we'll be summarizing that information, and then it's dependent on the HART board how often you'd like us to come back to present those monthly, quarterly, or biannually statistics.
Very good, thank you.
Mr. Harden?
Yes, so was the use of the Marion Street corridor a prerequisite of the FTOT grant, or was that just a determination of the collective group here?
I believe that was just a determination of the collected group. That offered a unique opportunity because it is a dedicated transit facility with some unique investments, whether it be for freight delivery along the way. But in generally, it's considered would be a closed course.
That's correct. It's like a fixed guideway. It's a fixed area just for transit. So it's DOT dollars was to be utilized in that corridor. So this is a great pilot to go and kick that off with.
Okay, but just specifically, I'm trying to understand, was it a requirement of the FDOT grant that the pilot be limited to Marion Street Transit or not?
Yes, yes it was.
Okay.
Ms. Donahue's next. Was there anything else? Ms. Donahue's next, but Jeff, did you want to add something to that?
Just that, although for the pilot, it is, since it's fixed guideway dollars, it needs to be used on our the only real fixed guideway that we have. Right. However, it is the ability, and something that we've talked with FDOT very extensively about is this. We don't want this to be a one and done in the fixed guideway corridor. We want to be able to utilize post-pilot as a branching off of Marion and having it as a true downtown mobility solution. So as far as this initial project is concerned, it is fixed guideway, but it is giving us the groundwork to be able to spread out later in post years, if that makes sense.
So that leads me to one more question. I'm just trying to understand, and excuse me if I'm a Luddite here on this topic, but so the technology and the scoring process that we used with these 15 criteria, are they, were they weighted towards technology that would be good on a fixed guideway without other traffic, or did they, would those same 15 guidelines result in us choosing a vehicle that, say, I know that Google's got a cab rollout in Phoenix, right, with numerous vehicles on the road that drive in traffic, and, so with these 15 criteria, did they lead us to select the technology that could drive on streets with cars and real world situations? Is that what we're testing?
Yes, the 15 criteria were very specific to autonomous operations. So whether that be on a dedicated closed course facility like Marion Street or through mixed traffic, it could apply to both situations.
Okay, and so additionally, did the FDOT grant limit us to these Monday through Friday hours? I mean, if you're showcasing something, wouldn't you want to bring it out when the most people would be able to see it and touch it and feel it, rather than put it on a street without much activity that doesn't really go anywhere?
The funding was only for so much for the first year, so we're utilizing on a per hour basis, and we utilize really when the transit way is used by us, right, mostly, and that's between 6 and 7 p.m., 6 a.m. and 6 and 7 p.m.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Donovan?
Yes, I just want to say I appreciate the work of the committee. I know that much discussion went into looking at the qualifications. If the chair is ready for a motion, I move to approve.
I actually had a couple of comments before we do that, and it may impact that. I guess the inclination to move to approve it. I actually had the opportunity to ride in one of the vehicles, and as you know, May Mobility came down, did the demo, and they're here again today. One of the things as we're going through the process of re-evaluating the advertisement, and I remember talking with Jeff extensively about that, was having that tangible feeling of riding in the vehicle. And so I have a few questions, but my first question is, did the reviewers, were they able to ride in all 3 of the vehicles that were evaluated?
We have not yet.
Okay.
In this case, First Transit uses Navia. It's already manufactured at a mass level. They do have a plant in Saline, Michigan. Once the board approves, I will myself be putting eyes on it. It is in operations in a lot of places all over the country and over the world. They have University of Michigan is operating it as well. So once we go to the site where they manufacture it, we're going to shoot over and see it in operations over there as well. Okay,
because that was one of the things that I stressed to Jeff, that just as an individual board member, that I wanted to see that, so that we we don't stub our toe again, that we actually have proof of concept.
Right.
And having been in the May Mobility vehicle, I just want to just be frank about it. It was an incredible experience. I have ridden in other autonomous vehicles, 2 others actually. I've been in a I guess the red vehicle that was at the autonomous vehicles demo a few years back. I don't want, but and then I've been in one on the Expressway Authority. They had a demo. SAE came out, and I will say that when I rode in the May Mobility vehicle, there's a qualitative aspect, I guess, to this. Almost like ride and feel, that I know that my fellow committee members may not have the you don't have that advantage. But I guess what I'm getting at is given again, we're respecting the scoring and the reviewers. There's that qualitative aspect, and I guess kind of the things that don't go into scoring that are really important to me. And to be frank with you, I'd like to have a larger discussion. I know Councilman Suarez rode in one of the vehicles.
I did too.
And you did as well. Did you have any thoughts or?
Oh no, I think the difference for me was that the scores were fairly heavy for their first choice. So it was based on more than that. Although absolutely, I mean, that day I was ready to sign on the line. Right. But when you look at the difference in the scores, it's quite a bit difference.
Yeah, and there's an interesting
flip
there on the price. May Mobility got a perfect score on price,
right.
Which is obviously an advantage. On the technical side, I guess was there any was there any specific reason that Dan that we can talk about here about the disparity, I guess, in the technical scoring?
From being a BTI ADA accessible person, one of my top things was ADA accessibility. So a vehicle that had it day one, that manufactured it day one, was a big plus, I thought. And a lot of the committee members felt the same. Are there other items too? I think the technology on the vehicle itself was very high, as well as them operating already in other places in mixed traffic. I mean, it is a fixed skyway, Marion Transit Way, but there's 2 DOT roads that cross through it. There's 8 signalized intersections. There's 3 stop signs. it's very mixed traffic use. So, you know, all of these vendors are able to do that kind of work. We just had to pick. I mean, it was very tough. We had to pick. We could be picky, really, is what it was. And we were able to choose things a little more technically savvy on that proposal.
Okay. If it's if the committee is pleased with this, I personally would prefer to kind of pull this out of the consent agenda so that we can have a larger discussion at the board. And again, I only say that because I have the advantage of having ridden in the May Mobility vehicle, and it was just impressive. And customer service, I think, is another aspect of it, and they clearly have a willingness to be, to travel here. I think also, I'm wondering if there's the potential to, there may not be, I know this is a procurement, there are rules, but again, that proof of concept, that may be past us, but is there any pleasure to pull this from the consent agenda and have a larger discussion?
If the committee prefers to send this to the larger board, I'm in agreement with that. I thought our discussion today was to send our recommendation, and if we don't have a firm recommendation, I mean, I don't know, I'm at the pleasure of the other committee members on that. I have not heard anyone jump to a second, so. I
would appreciate having a larger discussion on this topic at the full board meeting.
I will rescind my motion.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, we have a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay,
I do have another comment. I realize that.
Just to confirm, I believe the motion carries. Can we just raise our hands just so we have
to take it to the full board?
To take it to the full board. Okay, unanimous. Okay, thank you all.
I do have a matter I have to take care of, and means that I have to leave shortly, meaning that I will throw us out of quorum. So while I'm still here, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda B through G, unless a committee member would like to remove the item for discussion.
I have one thought on that. In my briefing with Jeff, I think the purpose of this, we kind of revisited, I guess, our intent as meeting as a committee, and I think that the other agenda items, I think the intent was really for us to kind of drill down into those agenda items as opposed to pass them as a consent. And if we don't discuss them today, we would need to discuss them in detail at the board meeting. Is that fair, Jeff?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I think what we would need to do, frankly, is really kind of punt the action items to the full board, which is.
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand that this has to go before the full board.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands that, my motion would be to move them to the full board, because if not.
But not as a consent agenda.
Right, correct. Because there could be one that we would say, no, don't move. And that would be the whole point, is either should we move all of them, or is there one that we're absolutely against, and we, if somebody has that, then that discussion should take place and we should vote on it. But if the general idea is to us to hear them, to vet them, and then move them onto the board, then without a quorum, that's my concern.
Right, right. And that concern is valid. And then we certainly want to respect your time as well.
I'm sorry.
No, that it happens. It happens. I think the one thing we do need to do today, before we do anything else, I did skip the approval of the minutes, and I apologize. Can I have a motion for the approval of the minutes?
I move to approve.
Okay, do we have a second? Second, okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed, like sign. Okay, the motion carries. So the minutes are approved. Given Councilwoman Donahue's concerns on the agenda items and the fact that we won't have quorum very soon, I guess we would really, is there anything that any committee member would like to discuss at this time and vote on at this time individually? Otherwise, it looks like it might be most pragmatic to defer what was going to be what we would discuss and would become the consent agenda. We would need to defer those items for full discussion at the board. But is there anything specific or any thoughts or comments?
I wanted to talk about the eight buses that we're going to purchase. I thought we had a good conversation about that in our last board meeting. However, I don't believe we discussed the pricing, and I thought we would talk a little bit more about that. But in light of the recommendation, we can move it forward to the board.
Okay, I have a quick question. If we have time to discuss the one item, I mean, you know, if that's important to you, perhaps we could discuss that and pass that as a consent item, or just defer. Do we have time to discuss that? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Mr. Seward, and thank you all for your patience.
Thank you.
While we work through this this constraint. Yeah, sorry.
Almost ran over you.
Good morning again, Jeff Seward, Interim Chief Executive Officer. To Ms. Williams' questions about the purchase of the 8 diesel buses. So we were notified that Sarasota County Transit was in the process of downsizing their routes and changing the vehicles that they're going to use for the remaining routes. So we had the opportunity to say that we wanted them. And there are 8 diesel buses. They are of the BRT style. They do have luggage racks, which we'll be able to use for the 275LX. And our maintenance team went to Sarasota. They inspected not only the vehicles, but the maintenance records and logs, and found all of them quite satisfactory. What I wanted to talk momentarily about, it is in the capital budget for FY19. It is in the diesel bus replacements at 8 for $1.428 million. Now, I wanted to put this into perspective. We're paying Sarasota County $1.428 million, and we're also assuming the federal interest for those buses. If we were to buy 8 brand new buses from Gillig, it would be $4.2 million. Thus, this action is essentially, with some accounting changes up and down, saving HART about $2.55 million by buying these buses now from Sarasota County, which, as you saw in the capital budget for FY19, we're already looking at 10 CNGs for next year. So this actually jumps our replacement program another 8. And rumor on the street has it that in December, Sarasota County is going to be looking at how many more? Another 12 that they're looking to get rid of. So we have it in the budget for 19. Not the 12 are not in there yet. I have to come back. But by moving forward with this action, it does a couple of things. One, it helps expedite our replacement program. 2, it saves $2.5 million of taxpayer funding. And 3, once we get these buses and get them rebranded, we have some play in whether or not we use them to replace right away or add or supplement service depending on what happens in November. So it isn't we'll have the asset no matter what, and the purpose of buying them is for replacement. It is not for additional service for the referendum. I want to make that very clear. We would do this, or I would recommend this, irrespective of the November initiative or not. However, it does give us a little bit of wiggle room if we were to be directed by the board to add some additional frequencies subsequent to the election. We would have the vehicles that normally we would never have the ability to do. So that's that item.
Thank you, Jeff. Ms. Williams?
What is the life cycle of those buses, the 8 that you referenced?
Yeah, 12 years.
Okay. So we'll get 12 years out of it.
We'll get, I think 6 more.
We'll get 6 more out of it. 6 is already,
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And
we squeak life out of our buses, which...
I had an opportunity to go through the tour, so I'm very sensitive to that, to understand what the needs are. And we had good conversation about it during the board meeting. So this is one of my interests in order to ensure that we have safe vehicles that will help us save on some of our costs across the board. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Knight?
Thank you. I wanted to know, if purchased, how soon could you at least, get them in try them out with anticipating probably in December more? Can we?
Essentially, we're hoping to take possession, since this will go to the full board, that we would take possession sometime early October. It will take us a bit of time to get some, they have to unbrand them from their logos. Their colors are not tremendously different from ours, interestingly enough. We may be able to do a quick detail of that and change over into our branding, and or we can wrap the vehicles, not necessarily with advertising, I don't say that. But we can wrap them to look like our brand, and that can buy us some time until we decide whether we want to permanently brand them in our blue colors or do we want to brand them with some other new format. And so we could potentially have them back on the road probably by December, if not sooner.
Okay. And it's pretty much the same buses that?
Yeah, they are. Actually, they have I will say, a little higher end interior. They're meant like coach buses for over the road, so they have a nicer interior. They have the shelf / luggage compartments on top that can be utilized on our new 275LX or our 60X that goes over to the LX that goes to the airport. So good feature for those that are traveling or even those that are shopping.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay. All right, Jeff, thank you very much. And anything else?
On my comment, I'll just stay up here.
Okay. All right, well, with that, do we have a motion to advance this item to the full board on the, as the one, at least the first item on the consent agenda?
A motion.
Okay, do we have a second?
A second.
Second, okay. All those in favor respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign? Okay, the ayes carried.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, well, with that, the remaining agenda items, I guess we could, and I just want to confer with Jeff. I mean, from a practical standpoint, we probably would hear about them again at the full board meeting.
Yes.
I guess the only question would be, out of respect to our committee members, is there anything you'd like to discuss or hear from staff on at this time on any of these items, or would it be acceptable to advance them onto the board? Well, I know we don't have a quorum, so that's happening either way. But is there anything today we'd like to cover? Otherwise, we would just move past these items.
I don't have anything specific.
All right. Okay. Well, with that, we will. I think we can move on to the interim Chief Executive Officer's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only thing I have this morning is, and it pertains to November. And at the board meeting, during my budget discussion, I stated that if there were a series of action items that I was going to take if it looked as if the referendum was going, or the initiative, the sales tax initiative was going to be on the ballot in November. At that time, we did not know whether it would be or would not be. It is. And I'm bringing forward to you what my recommended action is to prepare for that. And I know during the board meeting, there were a couple of board members that cited some discomfort with moving forward in preparation of the additional revenues. I wanted to talk a little bit about that today, as I feel very strongly that we have a fiduciary responsibility to prepare for that sales tax revenue. And in my opinion, as interim CEO, as well as former CFO, I don't see that as advocating. I see it as preparing, and preparing not only the staff and the organization, but the internal processes required. So if I may, I want to put this additional revenue into perspective. HART's budget would move to what would be equivalent to a quarter of the city of Tampa's operating budget is. We would be 3 times the budget of Plant City, or 3 times the budget of Temple Terrace. Or another perspective, we would be the Plant City, Temple Terrace, add another $75 million, and that would be HART. This is not a small amount of revenue that has the potential of flowing into HART. We need to prepare for that revenue. It's not the planning of spending the revenue, it's the planning of managing, from a stewardship perspective, that revenue. I can tell you wholeheartedly, and I can look out in our staff's faces to know that managing a $111 million budget is quite different than managing almost $250 million, $250 million budget, night and day. So what I am recommending is that under my authority, my signature authority, to bring in Public Resources Advisory Group. They have a contract with Hillsborough County. They do all of their financial modeling. They do all of their bonding and borrowing prep work. And exactly the scope of services would include evaluate the expected financial impact of HART of the proposed transportation referendum for both traditional bus service and dedicated guideway, develop cash flow models to analyze the financial impact on the current transit development plan, incorporating any restrictions included in the proposed transportation referendum. And this is key. Even though it's been touted that we would receive 45% of the total half-cent sales tax or 1 cent sales tax, there are 35% of those funds within that 45 that are restricted only for use on fixed guideway. So we do not do fund accounting or budgeting at HART. We have to have the infrastructure in place to be able to properly account for our current ad valorem, the new sales tax, and the restricted sales tax that would come with that, along with our grant funding. This would allow the opportunity for this firm who works, where we write off of a contract already prepared with Hillsborough County. The total estimate of cost is $43,000 for them to come in and do this work under my signature authority of $100,000 and start to develop the necessary means for us to accept the funding. Again, it isn't an evaluation of projects. It isn't a decision on which projects would receive funding. It's preparing for the accounting and the management of those dollars. Waiting until November 7th to do this gives us 60 days before that cash starts to flow in. And that is not enough time to prepare, in my opinion. And that concludes my
Thank you, Mr.
statement.
Stewart. I have a couple of comments. Are there any comments or questions on the chair's or the interim CEO's report?
I think that the idea of having a contingency plan is a good one. And, you know, if I were you, I'd be prepared for a robust dialogue about that at the board meeting. So,
thank you, Mr. Harden. No, I think Jeff is really just kind of touching the tip of the iceberg, to be frank with you. You know, I mean, you're how should I say this? Your cloth is cut as a CFO, and you're our current interim CEO, and we really enjoy the benefit of your expertise in that area and your leadership. And I've said that before. I think this is no different. You know, what you're basically saying is we need to be prepared, and so to spend $43,000 to do that when we're going to be spending about $60,000 to go out for a nationwide search. You know, order of magnitude wise, this is not a large ask, in my humble opinion, and it's prudent. But regarding the tip of the iceberg, you know, there are things that I think about when, again, and I think there will be a robust discussion at the board meeting, as Mr. Harden indicated. We have, you know, we've finished this performance audit, but now you're doing preparations for the what if, and if we look back on the what if when we were doing Mission Max and we were talking about the full-time, the FTEs, you know, what ripples that caused. Just think about what ripples and what, you know, it's almost like a domino effect. I mean, if we really drill down into it, there's not just the financial piece, but there's operations and safety. I mean, there's so many other components. And I just commend staff for doing your day-to-day job, but also going above and beyond to tackle these challenges. I really, you know, just am impressed, and I want to commend staff and your team. So thank you. Well, that's pretty much. Well, I will say just one other comment, I guess, as part of the chair's report, kind of roll all that in together. You know, we're a sovereign special taxing body, right? We have sovereignty via state charter. And one of the questions that I want to ask And Julia, perhaps, I don't know if you want to comment on it today, but I'm a little concerned about the idea of our sovereignty from a legal standpoint, the legality, if you will, of accepting all this money. I'm sure it's fine, but I guess one of the things, and again, I guess it goes to our state charter and the fact that we have sovereignty. This isn't the funding that we're actively seeking as a body. It is really kind of, it's being chosen by someone else. And I know that's kind of a philosophical question, but I just wanted to bring that up. I mean, to me, sovereignty is important, regardless of the body. And if anybody has any thoughts on that, I'd love to talk about that now, because we are the Finance and Audit Committee, and I think that those issues, could be vetted here, or we could discuss them at the board. But any thoughts on that? Are my concerns misplaced, or is that worth looking into?
I think for my own,
Ms.
thank
Williams?
you, Chair.
Yeah, you're recognized.
For my own benefit, I'm going to go back in and evaluate your question. I don't think I have enough intelligence around it at this point and given the thought necessary to respond, but I do appreciate the question. It'll be something I'll be prepared to speak to at the board.
Okay, thank you. All right. Julie, I guess I had a question regarding council and the possibility of looking into it. And forgive me for not having, a direct question, but if I'm concerned about, our sovereignty and our charter and this unique situation, any thoughts on that, or I don't know if we've looked at that at all internally yet, Jeff, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, it might be more of a question for Jeff, but do we have any thoughts or comments on that idea?
I do not.
Okay. Any Julia, I know you don't normally sit with us, so sorry to put you on the spot, but
and that's okay. For the record, Julia Mandel with the law firm of Gray Robinson, serving as your general counsel today.
Thank you.
Without digging deeper into what I think your question is, I can give you my general thoughts, just having been around the area and knowledge of your special act as well as the charter of Hillsborough County. But what I understand your question to be is, what is the legalities once this revenue, say for the sake of argument, this revenue does come to fruition and is then placed within the responsibility of HART, the HART board. What are the legal parameters that exist today? Is there any legal parameters that will need to be reviewed? And how would that work in terms of assuring that your sovereignty and your charter that you operate under, which is your independent as a special district through a special act of Florida legislature, what would that mean? And that's certainly something we can go back and look at and research for you. But just generally, from what I know and understand, you do have a special act that does give you as a body the right to provide transit within the area and seek whatever revenue and accept whatever revenue that exists. You also would be, however, then operating as well under the charter of Hillsborough County, which, if this is voted and adopted by the electorate of Hillsborough County, would in fact be a charter amendment of Hillsborough County. So you would be also operating under those parameters. So really, I think where your question is something that is worthy of looking at is how those two legal entities, the charter of Hillsborough County as well as your special act, play together. It's my suspicion that they'll play together fine. It may well be that there may need to be some work at your special act if there's any conflict whatsoever. Those are really the two and how they play together.
Thank you.
But we can look at that further. I'll discuss that with David Smith, who serves as your general counsel, and we can get you some more information on that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And for me, it's more, thank you. It's more of a kind of a confirmation prudence gesture. So thank you for hearing that. Okay. Unless there's anything else, I believe we're adjourned.